Loneliness doesn't hit you all at once. It sneaks in. Quiet. Slow. You don't notice at first. You convince yourself it's normal. That this is just how life goes. Until one day, you wake up and realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. You can be in the same house, eating at the same table, sleeping in the same bed, and still feel like you don't exist. Still feel like a ghost, floating through a life that doesn't see you. That was me. A wife. A woman who had everything, or so it seemed. A home. A marriage. A routine. But behind closed doors? I was disappearing. And no one, not my husband, not my friends, not a single soul noticed. But someone did. And the way they saved me? I never could have imagined it. It wasn't my husband. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't even a person. It was my dog. And before you think, oh, just another emotional pet story, listen to me. You have no idea where this is going. Because what happened next? It changed everything. By the time I finally saw the truth, I realized I had been blind for years. So before we get into it, let me ask you, have you ever ignored that feeling in your gut? That whisper in the back of your mind telling you something isn't right? If you have, listen carefully. Because this is a story you don't want to miss. And if you've ever felt loneliness pull you towards something you never expected, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because some betrayals, some truths, are too real to ignore. My name is Charlotte. I'm 39 years old. And for the last 5 years, I've been married to a man who forgot I existed. Fred wasn't always like this. There was a time when he made me feel like the only woman in the world. When his eyes lit up just at the sight of me. When his hands found mine without thinking. When he used to pull me into him at night, breathing me in like he never wanted to let go. But love doesn't die in an instant. It fades, like a candle burning down to nothing. The warmth disappears so slowly that by the time the darkness comes, you don't even remember when the light was last there. I don't know exactly when I lost him. Maybe it was after the promotions. Maybe it was after the endless late nights. Maybe it was when I stopped being exciting, stopped being new. But one day, I woke up and he wasn't really there anymore. He was a body moving through the house. A voice on the phone. A name on my bank account. He'd come home late, drop his keys on the counter, and barely look at me before heading straight to the bedroom. Sometimes he'd eat in the office. Sometimes he wouldn't eat at all. And when he did sit across from me at dinner, the silence between us stretched so wide it felt like we were in separate rooms. I tried at first. I asked about his day. He gave short answers. I made his favorite meals. He barely noticed. I dressed up for him, hoping he'd see me, hoping he'd remember. But his eyes never lingered. His touch never came. And eventually I stopped trying. That was the hardest part. Not the loneliness. Not even the rejection. But the way I had to teach myself not to need him anymore. How I had to train myself to stop reaching for him in the middle of the night. How I had to bite my tongue when I wanted to tell him something, knowing he'd barely be listening. People think loneliness is being alone. But it's not. It's lying next to someone who won't even turn their head to look at you. And in that silence, in that emptiness, the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart was Cooper. My dog. Cooper came into my life before Fred started pulling away. A golden retriever, full of life, full of love. He was supposed to be our dog. But somewhere along the way, he became mine. My shadow. My companion. The only one who noticed when my smile started to fade. The only one who came to my side when I sat on the kitchen floor at night, wondering what I had done to deserve this kind of loneliness. He was there when I cried into my hands. He was there when I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was just how marriages ended quietly, with nothing but a sigh. When I felt empty, he nudged my hand. When I felt lost, he curled up against my legs, warm and solid, like a reminder that I wasn't completely invisible. And when Fred walked in the door every night without a single glance in my direction, Cooper saw. He always saw. The house had changed. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a structure filled with old echoes of laughter that had long disappeared. The air was thick with something unspoken. The bed was colder. The nights stretched longer. And every morning, I woke up feeling a little less like myself. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I told myself it was just a phase. I stayed because I was too tired to leave. I stayed because leaving meant admitting that the love I once believed in was gone. I had learned to live in the silence. I had learned to move through the loneliness like it was a part of me. But I didn't know then that silence has a way of hiding the truth. And sometimes, the things you ignore are the very things that will destroy you. And soon, I would learn that my loneliness was only the beginning. I don't know what woke me that night. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the weight of something I had been ignoring for too long. But when my eyes snapped open, my chest felt tight, too tight. My breaths came in short gasps, like I was drowning in air. I had never felt anything like it before. Panic. Real, suffocating panic. It was as if all the loneliness, all the neglect, all the invisible wounds I had pushed down for years had suddenly clawed their way to the surface, demanding to be felt. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady myself, but my body wouldn't listen. My pulse hammered in my ears. My fingers tingled. I felt like I was slipping into some dark, endless void, like something was pulling me under. And then, I felt it. A warm, steady weight against my side. A presence, solid, grounding. Cooper. I hadn't even heard him jump onto the bed. But there he was, curled up beside me, his head resting on my arm, his breathing slow and deep calm, like he was trying to lend me some of his peace. I clutched onto his fur without thinking, pressing my face against him, inhaling the familiar scent of him, the only thing in my life that felt safe. And for the first time in months, I wasn't alone. I don't know how long I lay there, holding onto him like a lifeline. But slowly, the panic faded. My breaths evened out. My chest loosened. The shaking stopped. And in that moment, something broke inside me. I started talking. I don't know why. Maybe because he was the only one who had been there. Maybe because I had spent so long keeping everything inside, pretending I was okay, that I just couldn't anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me, I whispered into the dark. I don't know how I got here. Cooper didn't move. He just listened. I miss him, you know? My voice cracked. Or maybe I just miss who he used to be. I miss feeling like I mattered. Like I was more than just furniture in my own house. I don't even know who I am anymore. Tears slipped down my face, soaking into his fur. I didn't even try to stop them. Is this normal? I let out a bitter laugh. Do people just stop loving each other? Just like that? No warning, no goodbye? Just one day, you wake up, and the person you built your whole life around is a stranger. Cooper let out a soft whine, shifting closer. His warmth, his presence, it was the only comfort I had felt in so long that it made my chest ache. Maybe it's me, I whispered. Maybe I stopped being enough. Maybe I got boring. Maybe I should have tried harder. I felt his nose press against my cheek, warm and gentle, like he was trying to tell me something. Like he understood every word. And that's when I noticed it. Every time I cried, every time the loneliness became too much, he was always there. Not just nearby, not just in the same room, right next to me. Pressed against me. Watching me. Like he knew. Like he felt it. Like he was waiting for me to break so he could catch me before I fell too far. I had never paid attention before. But now? Now I saw it. The way he studied me. The way he reacted to my emotions before I even voiced them. The way his ears perked up at certain words. The way his body stiffened every time Fred came home late. The way his eyes, warm and deep, held something more than just instinct. Something knowing. I didn't know it yet, but this dog was about to change everything. Days passed. Then weeks. And something shifted. I stopped waiting for Fred. I stopped checking the clock at dinner, wondering if he'd make it home in time to eat with me. I stopped listening for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. Stopped hoping he'd look at me when he walked through the door. Stopped trying to close the distance between us. Instead, I turned to Cooper. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened. Little by little, without me realizing. When I woke up in the morning, Cooper was the first one I saw. When I came home from the grocery store, He was the only one waiting for me. When I sat on the couch, staring at the television but not really watching, he would rest his head on my lap, breathing steady, warm, there. He was always there. And the more I felt it, the more I noticed the absence of someone who should have been. Fred was just gone. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. We barely spoke. And when we did, it was surface level, nothing deeper than schedules, bills, things that had to be said. He moved around me like I was an obstacle, not a person. We slept in the same bed, but it felt like miles stretched between us. I could scream, and I don't think he would have heard me. And so I stopped trying to be heard. Instead, I spoke to Cooper. I found myself venting to him after long days, pouring out everything I kept bottled up inside. I told him about the loneliness, about the emptiness, about how I used to feel like someone, and now I just felt like a shell. I told him things I hadn't even admitted to myself. And the strangest part? It helped. Because he listened. Truly listened. He wasn't distracted, wasn't half-engaged, wasn't waiting for me to finish so he could say something else. He just existed with me, without expectation, without judgment, without making me feel like I was too much or not enough. And then the confusion set in. Why did I feel safer with my dog than my own husband? Why did I feel more seen, more understood, more wanted by an animal? Was this normal? Was it okay to feel this attached? Was I losing my grip on reality, or had I just been so deprived of basic human connection that even the smallest bit of warmth felt like something more than it was? I started questioning everything. Was this what love was supposed to feel like? A slow, aching silence? A dull, heavy weight pressing on my chest every time I looked at the person I had promised forever to? Was I asking for too much? Or had I settled for too little? The guilt crept in then. A nagging whisper at the back of my mind. Maybe I should be trying harder. Maybe I had let things go too far. Maybe I was the problem. Had I been distant too? Had I stopped showing him love first? Had I let my own resentment build so high that I had shut him out without realizing it? So I tried. One last time, I tried. I made dinner. Something he used to love. I set the table properly, lit a candle, made an effort. I told myself, this is how you fix things. You take small steps. You start somewhere. But he didn't come home for dinner. He texted instead. Late night at the office. Don't wait up. That was it. No apology. No sign that he even noticed or cared. I sat there at the table, staring at the untouched plates, at the flickering candle, at the empty chair across from me. And I felt something crack inside me. A final, quiet snap. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Because it hit me then. It didn't matter how much I tried, how much effort I put in, how much I begged for scraps of attention. You can't hold on to someone who isn't reaching back. And Fred? He had let go a long time ago. After that night at the dinner table, something inside me changed. I stopped trying to fix what was already broken. Stopped searching for signs that Fred still cared. Stopped hoping he would suddenly wake up one day and remember the woman he used to love. Instead, I focused on the only thing that still felt real. Cooper. I started paying closer attention to him. Noticed things I hadn't before. The way he stared at me, really stared, like he could see straight through me, past the forced smiles, past the quiet sadness I thought I had hidden so well. The way his ears perked up at certain words, like he understood what I was saying, not just the tone, but the meaning. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just coincidence. It was something deeper. Something I couldn't explain. Every night, he stayed close. Closer than usual. If I sat on the couch, he was pressed against my leg. If I moved to the kitchen, he followed. If I lay in bed, he curled up beside me, his body warm against mine, his breathing steady, grounding. And I welcomed it. Because it was the only warmth left in this house. But then, things got stranger. Whenever I sat alone, lost in thought, drowning in that silent sadness I had grown used to, Cooper nudged me. Not randomly. Not like a dog asking for attention. It was deliberate. He'd push against me, almost forceful, until I had to move. Until I had to get up, step outside, breathe. It was like he knew when I was spiraling. Like he refused to let me sink too deep. And every single time, he led me to the same place. The backyard. It became a ritual, almost. Late at night, when the house was too quiet, when I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me, I'd follow him out the back door. The air was always cool, the night still. Cooper would sit by the fence, ears up, body tense, staring out into the darkness beyond. I never questioned it. I just stood beside him, staring at nothing, listening to the wind rustling through the trees, feeling something I couldn't name settle in my chest. But then, I saw it. A shadow. Movement. Just beyond the fence line, where the yard met the trees. A figure, standing still, watching. My breath caught. Every part of me screamed to turn back, to run inside, to lock the door. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Because beneath the fear, beneath the instinct to be afraid, I felt something else. Relief. And I didn't understand it then. Why I wasn't terrified. Why my pulse wasn't racing. Why I wasn't backing away. But I was about to. The figure in the darkness didn't move. Didn't step forward. Didn't turn away. Just stood there, watching. And for reasons I still can't explain, I didn't feel fear. I felt something deeper. Something heavier. I should have gone inside. I should have locked the door, shaken off the feeling crawling up my spine, told myself it was nothing. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, my breath shallow, my pulse steady but slow. Cooper was still beside me, ears up, eyes locked on the shadow. Not barking. Not growling. Just watching. And then, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. I don't know how long I stood there after that, staring into the space where they had been. But eventually, I whispered, "Who was that?" Cooper didn't move. He just let out a low whine, nudging my hand, leading me back inside. I should have been afraid. But all I felt was the deep, unsettling certainty that my life was about to change. The next morning, everything felt different. Like a thread had finally been pulled loose, unraveling something I had ignored for too long. The weight of it was unbearable, suffocating. And I knew I couldn't live in this silence anymore. Fred came home late again that night. I heard the door open, heard the sound of his keys dropping onto the counter, heard the familiar shuffle of his shoes as he walked straight to the bedroom without a word. But this time, I didn't stay in the shadows. This time, I was waiting for him. "Where were you?" My voice was steady. Too steady. He barely looked at me. "Work. Liar." That got his attention. He turned, eyebrows raised, mouth twisting into that smirk he always wore when he wanted me to feel small. "Excuse me?" I took a step closer. "I know, Fred." He laughed. Not a real laugh. A dry, humorless exhale. "Know what? That you've been sitting in this house too long, making up stories in your head. Gaslighting. Classic. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time." "Who is she?" I asked. His smirk faltered for just a second. A blink. A twitch of the jaw. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. "Jesus, Charlotte," he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. This is what happens when you have nothing to do all day. You start imagining things. Imagining things. I almost laughed. Almost screamed. But before I could say another word, Cooper did something he had never done before. He growled. Not a soft, uncertain whimper. Not a low grumble of discomfort. A deep, rumbling warning. Fred froze. I looked at Cooper, heart pounding. His entire body was stiff, eyes locked onto Fred, lips curled back just enough to show his teeth. And that's when I knew. This dog. My dog. The one who had been at my side through every lonely night, who had been watching, listening, knowing he wasn't just comforting me. He had been protecting me. He had always known the truth. Fred took a step back. What the hell is wrong with him? Cooper's growl deepened. His hackles rose. He was daring Fred to come closer. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something in Fred's face I hadn't seen before. Guilt. Fear. Not fear of the dog. Fear of being caught. "You've been lying to me for months, haven't you?" My voice was quiet. Every late night. Every excuse. Every time you walked in this house smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. Fred opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. And every time he did, he knew. Cooper knew. Fred scoffed, shaking his head. You sound insane. And then Cooper snapped. A full, sharp bark. Loud, angry, a sound I had never heard from him before. Fred flinched. Actually flinched. And I swear, in that moment, it was like something inside him crumbled. He knew. Knew there was no coming back from this. Knew I wasn't going to back down. Knew, maybe for the first time, that he wasn't in control anymore. I took one last step forward, staring straight into his eyes. I want the truth, Fred. All of it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because the silence? The hesitation? The way his face twisted, like he wanted to lie but couldn't. That was the truth. And the only sound in the room was the steady, low growl of the only one who had never betrayed me. Cooper. Fred didn't say a word. He just stood there, jaw clenched, hands balled into fists at his sides, staring at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. Like he was the victim. Like I had crossed the line by demanding the truth. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink under his gaze like I used to. Because I wasn't alone anymore. Cooper was still standing at my side, muscles tight, ready. His growl had faded, but his body remained stiff, alert. He wasn't just watching Fred, he was warning him. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just a pet protecting his owner. This was something deeper. Something primal. Something that had been building for months. And Fred felt it too. He grabbed his jacket off the chair, movements sharp, angry. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You've lost it, Charlotte. I didn't argue. Didn't fight. Didn't plead. I just watched. Because I wasn't the one who had lost anything. Fred moved toward the door, pausing only for a second with his hand on the knob. You really want to throw away our marriage over some paranoid fantasy? I almost laughed. Almost. You already threw it away, Fred, I said. I'm just finally seeing it for what it is. His jaw tightened. He let out a scoff, shaking his head. And then he walked out. Just like that. No apology. No remorse. No last-minute fight to hold on. Because the truth is, Fred had left a long time ago. His body had stayed, but his heart, his loyalty, his love, that had been gone for months. Maybe even years. And now, finally, I wasn't clinging to a ghost anymore. The house was silent after he left. Too silent. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, waiting to feel something. Relief. Anger. Pain. But all I felt was empty. Like I had spent so long bracing for a storm, only to find out it had already passed. I turned, feeling the weight of the night settle on my shoulders. And that's when I saw Cooper. He had moved to the couch, curled up in the spot I always sat in, watching me. His ears twitched, his eyes warm, knowing. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't excited. He just understood. So I walked over, sat down beside him. And the second I did, he shifted, pressing himself against me, warm and steady. For months, I had felt like I was disappearing. Like I was vanishing into the background, unseen, unheard, unloved. But Cooper saw me. He had always seen me. I let out a slow breath, running my fingers through his fur, feeling his heartbeat against my leg. Slow, steady, real. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I was still broken. Still hurting. Still carrying the weight of everything I had lost. But I wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough. I spent years feeling invisible. I thought I was overreacting. I thought I was just lonely. That maybe this was just how love faded over time, slowly, quietly, without warning. I told myself that every marriage had rough patches, that I just needed to be patient, that things would go back to the way they used to be. But they never did. I see it so clearly now. The way I made excuses for him. The way I convinced myself that his silence wasn't neglect, that his distance wasn't a choice. I twisted reality to protect my own heart. Because admitting the truth, that he had stopped loving me, that he had already left in every way that mattered, felt more painful than pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It never was. My instincts had been screaming at me for months, maybe years. I had felt the shift, felt the absence of something I couldn't name. But instead of trusting myself, I buried it. I silenced the voice inside me that whispered, "This isn't love. This isn't how it's supposed to feel." And now, sitting here in the quiet, Cooper's body warm against mine, I finally let myself ask the question I had been too afraid to face. If he hadn't been here, if Cooper hadn't been at my side through every lonely night, every unanswered question, every moment of doubt, would I have stayed? Would I have spent the rest of my life in a house that felt more like a prison than a home? Would I have convinced myself that this hollow existence was enough? That being tolerated was the same as being loved? That I was lucky just to have someone? How many people are doing exactly that right now? How many people ignore their own pain, convincing themselves that if they just hold on a little longer, things will change? I wonder how many nights I would have cried myself to sleep before I finally admitted that I wasn't just lonely, I was dying inside. I wonder how many years I would have lost, waiting for a man who had already walked away. And I wonder if I ever would have left at all. Because the truth is, I wasn't strong enough to save myself. Not then. I had grown so used to feeling small, to being ignored, to shrinking into the background, that I had forgotten how to stand on my own. I had forgotten how to want more. But Cooper never let me disappear. He never let me drown in my own silence. He saw me when no one else did. He pulled me back every time I started slipping under. And when I was finally ready to open my eyes, he was the one who led me to the truth. He saved me. And I don't think I ever would have saved myself. Have you ever ignored the signs? Have you ever stayed in a situation, not because it made you happy, not because it felt right, but because it was easier than facing the truth? I did. For years. I told myself that if I just waited long enough, if I just tried a little harder, things would go back to how they used to be. That the love that once held us together wasn't gone, just buried beneath the weight of time, stress, routine. But love doesn't just disappear overnight. And neither does loneliness. It happens slowly, quietly. So quietly that by the time you notice how deep the emptiness has settled inside you, it feels impossible to crawl out of it. So tell me, have you ever felt it? That ache in your chest when you sit across from someone who no longer sees you? That slow, gnawing realization that you're more alone with them than you ever would be without them. If you have, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Let's talk. Because no one deserves to feel invisible in their own life. And if you love real, raw stories like this, stories about the kind of betrayals no one sees coming, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, some betrayals, some truths, are even worse than this. Loneliness doesn't just happen overnight. It's a slow, creeping thing. A quiet thief that steals pieces of you when you're not paying attention. And if you let it, it will take everything. But if you're feeling invisible, if there's something inside you screaming that something isn't right, listen to it. Your gut doesn't lie. Your heart knows the truth before your mind is ready to accept it. And if you have to convince yourself that you're happy, you probably aren't. I thought my dog was just a pet. But it turned out, he was the only one truly looking out for me. He saw the truth before I did. He felt the absence, the shift, the betrayal long before I was willing to name it. And when I was too weak to face it, he led me straight to it. Listen to the ones who love you unconditionally. The ones who stand by you when everything else crumbles. The ones who don't need words to understand your pain. And if no one else does, maybe that's your sign to leave.